The wind rolled in low over the ridge, dry and sweet, carrying the scent of pine and lake water. I hadn't smelled it in over 15 years, but it hit me like a memory set on fire. Stillwater Ranch looked almost exactly as I remembered and touched, wide and defiant. 80 acres of scrub brush, cedar trees, and the same quiet lake that had mirrored my childhood summers now shimmered before me like it had waited all this time. I parked my truck under the old oak near the bluff and stepped out, boots crunching, on gravel. My name is Luke Carson. After 20 years in the Army, 2 deployments, and 1 bruising divorce, I wasn't looking for trouble, just peace, maybe even a place to start over. Stillwater was my inheritance left to me by my grandfather, Eli Carson. He built the ranch with his bare hands, and for most of my youth it was my haven. That peace didn't last an hour. I had barely finished pitching my canvas tent near the lake's edge, my old favorite fishing spot, when a sharp voice sliced through the air. "You can't be here." I turned. A woman in a crisp pastel polo and oversized sunglasses stood just beyond the tree line, clipboard tucked tight against her chest like a badge. She wasn't smiling. "This is private HOA land," she said, each word clipped. "Camping isn't permitted, ma'am. This is Stillwater Ranch," I replied evenly. "Private property. Been in my family for generations. I've got the deed in my glove box if you'd like to see it." She didn't flinch. "You must be mistaken. This area belongs to Clearview Lakes HOA. I'm Margie Fields, the association president." I didn't know whether to laugh or get angry. Instead, I walked to my truck and pulled out the laminated survey map my granddad kept like scripture. I unfolded it, laid it on the hood, and pointed to the lake. "See this line? That's the border. Everything west of it, including the lake. And this spot right here is Stillwater Ranch. That means it's mine." Margie's mouth twitched. Her eyes darted from the map to the tent, then back to me. "I don't care what your map says. You're camping in what's been designated as HOA community space for years. There are rules." "I didn't sign any HOA agreement," I said flatly. She straightened. "The community maintains this area. We pay for upkeep, throw neighborhood events, regulate fire safety. You can't just show up and camp on my own land." I interrupted. "With a permitless tent and a campfire ring my granddad built 40 years ago." She stepped back, nostrils flaring. "If you don't leave voluntarily, I'll be forced to call the authorities." I leaned against the hood, arms folded. "Go ahead. Maybe they'd like to see the survey too." She huffed, spun on her heel, and marched off toward the cul-de-sac that backed up to the lake. I watched her disappear into the rows of identical beige homes, each one smug and square like it had been stamped from a mold. I didn't pack up. I didn't even move. Instead, I sat down beside the fire pit and struck a match. The flame caught quickly in the dry pine needles, and for the first time in months I exhaled. But that brief moment of peace was short-lived. By sunset, I spotted 2 sheriff's cruisers kicking up dust down the old ranch road. I didn't move, just poked the fire and waited. Something told me this was only the beginning. The red and blue lights cut through the pines like sirens of judgment. Gravel crunched under the weight of 2 sheriff cruisers pulling up near my tent. I stayed seated by the fire, legs stretched, arms relaxed, but every muscle in my body coiled like a spring. Deputy Mark Carlson stepped out first, tall, broad-shouldered, and sporting the same drawl I remembered from high school football. We'd played on the same team once. Back then, he was a defensive tackle with a good heart and a mean streak reserved only for the opposing team. "Luke Carson?" he asked, tipping his hat. "That's me," I said, motioning to the fire. "Want a seat or just here for the show?" He smirked, but the second deputy, a younger guy with mirrored sunglasses and a rigid stance, didn't seem interested in small talk. "Got a call from the Clearview Lakes HOA," Mark continued. "Said someone was trespassing on community land, setting illegal fires, pitching unapproved structures. Thought we'd better check it out." I stood slowly and reached into my duffel, pulling out a plastic folder. Inside were the originals, the deed, the will, and a recent survey I'd had verified when I inherited the land. "Appreciate the visit, Mark, but I think you'll find I'm not the one trespassing." He flipped through the documents, nodding. "Stillwater Ranch, 80 acres, boundaries clear as day." "Exactly," I said. "The HOA has been using this lake for years, but not once have they asked permission. It's always been ours. Granddad never complained. He wasn't the type, but I'm not planning to let strangers walk all over the place like it's a public park." The younger deputy stepped forward. "So what's the story with the dock, the benches, the picnic area, all built without our consent?" I replied. "No permits, no leases, just squatting on a legacy." Before Mark could respond, a familiar storm approached Margie Fields, flanked by 2 HOA board members in matching navy polo shirts and expressions like sour milk. She marched up like she was leading a parade. "Officers," she said, voice sharp, "this is the man I told you about. He refuses to leave the common grounds." Mark held up the deed. "Ma'am, according to the SAN, the county records Mr. Carson owns this entire side of the lake, including where your dock and amenities currently sit." Margie blinked. "That can't be. Our HOA maps clearly mark this area as community lakefront." "They might say that," Mark replied carefully, but they don't override legal land ownership. This land belongs to Stillwater Ranch. But the board members, a stout man with a red face, chimed in. This has to be a mistake. We've been maintaining this land for years. Our dues cover the upkeep. Then I'd ask for a refund, I said, because none of that gave you the right to build on my property. Margie's voice cracked like dry wood. This is outrageous. You can't just show up and change everything. I stepped closer, my voice level. I didn't change anything. I came home. You're the ones who decided this lake was yours without asking a single question. Mark closed the folder and handed it back to me. No crime here, folks, but you might want to start talking to a lawyer before this becomes a real mess. Margie's lips pressed into a pale line. We'll take this up with the HOA legal team. You haven't heard the end of this. I'm counting on it, I said, tipping my hat. She stormed off, her entourage trailing behind like shadows. Mark gave me a long look. You always did have a way of kicking the hornet's nest. I didn't kick anything, I muttered. I just sat down where I belonged. As the cruisers pulled away, the night settled in again, but it felt different now, taut humming, with tension. The fire crackled louder, the trees leaned in. The lake, once a mirror of stillness, seemed to ripple with something darker. Lines had been drawn, and for the first time in decades, Stillwater Ranch was about to fight for its name. 3 days later, I woke to find bright orange stakes driven into the dirt around my campsite. Plastic flags fluttered on nylon strings, encircling my tent like a prison perimeter. A laminated notice hung from one of the poles, stamped with the seal of Clearview Lakes HOA. Notice of violation. Unpermitted use of community property, immediate compliance required. Fines accruing daily. Below it was a list of invented infractions. Unauthorized tent. Illegal open flame. Encampment. I laughed out loud. It was equal parts ridiculous and desperate. I tore it down and tossed it into the fire. They were grasping at straws now, using paper threads to regain ground they never owned. But it wasn't just bluster, there was strategy behind it. They wanted to overwhelm me with bureaucracy, exhaust me into submission. But I'd seen worse in real war zones, and I wasn't about to fold to a suburban paper army. I made a call to my cousin Trey, a real estate attorney in Dallas with a penchant for courtroom drama. By evening, he'd driven down cowboy boots, tapping confidently as he stepped out of his Bronco with a folder thick enough to silence a church choir. They're trespassing, Trey confirmed after reviewing the documents. Every deck post, every screw in that dock, every barbecue they've ever hosted here, it's all illegal. If they want to fight, you can give them one. I don't want to fight, I said, but I won't be bullied. Then let's make this official. The next morning we filed a formal cease and desist letter citing unauthorized land use, unpermitted construction, and damages. The letter was delivered to every member of the Clearview Lakes HOA board, and a larger copy was posted on a tree beside the lake just above their dock. By sundown, the phone calls began. They weren't angry at first. Some were apologetic. A few claimed they didn't realize the lake wasn't theirs, but when they learned I was enforcing a total ban on HOA access until a formal agreement was reached, their tone changed quickly. Margie was the last to call. This is harassment, she said coldly. You're punishing the entire community for a clerical mistake. No, I replied. I'm protecting what's mine. You can remove your dock and signs voluntarily, or I'll have them removed myself. That same day, 2 HOA board members tried to chain the dock to a nearby tree, claiming it was protected community property. I didn't bother arguing. I called the sheriff. Deputy Carson showed up again, clipboard in hand. This is getting ridiculous, he said as he snapped photos of the chained dock. They crossed the line, I told him. Again, they've been walking on this land for years without so much as a thank you. Now they're throwing chains around like it's theirs to claim, he sighed. Well, you're within your rights. I'll file the trespass report. By noon the next day, I arrived at the lake with a crowbar, bolt cutters, and a chainsaw. The dock came apart plank by plank. I dragged the wood up the ridge and stacked it in a heap outside their nearest boundary fence on top. I left a painted sign, private property violation, return to sender. That night, Margie called again, furious this time. You had no right to destroy our dock. You had no right to build it, I replied. There will be consequences. I'm counting on it. The next morning I installed a 10-foot steel gate at the only clear trail leading from the subdivision to the lake, complete with barbed wire and a motion-triggered camera. A large wooden sign hung beside it. Stillwater Ranch trespassers will be PROCCUTI. The HOA board called an emergency meeting that evening. I watched from the ridge, sipping coffee as residents gathered under a white canopy, most looking confused or frustrated. Margie stood at the front, red-faced and shouting into a microphone I couldn't hear, but I didn't need the words. The visuals were enough. The lake had shifted from community jewel to a battlefield, and they were losing control of it. The power Margie wielded with her clipboard and bylaws couldn't touch me out here. Stillwater wasn't governed by paint swatches and parking rules. It was governed by history and blood, and paper trails that went deeper than her committee could fathom. And for the first time, I saw what this really was, not just a boundary dispute, but a reckoning. 2 weeks later, I stood in a courtroom under buzzing fluorescent lights, watching Margie Fields squirm behind a polished oak table. Her perfectly ironed blouse and tight smile couldn't hide the storm brewing in her eyes. She had brought in a well-dressed attorney, armed with printed HOA maps and dramatics, but none of it could rewrite what the land records had already made clear. Judge Whitaker, an old rancher himself, didn't waste time. The court has reviewed all deeds, surveys, and property records submitted, he said, flipping a few pages. With a bored sigh, Stillwater Ranch, including the lake in question and the surrounding shoreline, is owned in full by Mr. Luke Carson. The Clearview Lakes HOA has no legal claim to any part of this land. Margie flinched. Her attorney tried to object, citing community precedent, but the judge cut him off. Precedent does not override ownership. If the HOA has been using Mr. Carson's property without consent, then it's trespassing, plain and simple. I didn't move, didn't blink, just sat steady, jaw clenched, hands folded over the same survey map that had unraveled their illusion. The judgment hit like a hammer. The HOA was ordered to remove all remaining structures from the Stillwater shoreline within 14 days, pay $38,000 in damages for unlawful use of private land, refrain from any future access without a formal easement agreement. Margie stood up too fast, her chair scraping the floor. This is a disaster, she muttered under her breath. You've humiliated an entire neighborhood. I finally spoke. No, ma'am, you did that all by yourself. Outside the courthouse, a few HOA residents approached me. Some apologized, others simply nodded, the shame and exhaustion clear on their faces. It was never about them. It was always about Margie and her power games. By the end of the week, workers hired by the HOA showed up to dismantle what remained: broken benches, cracked picnic tables, and what was left of the old dock I hadn't touched. They worked quietly, glancing at me now and then as I stood with arms crossed near the water. The lake looked wider now, freer. I used the settlement money for something that felt right. Not a lawsuit, not revenge, but legacy. A local crew helped me build a simple log cabin by the water's edge, nothing fancy, just a porch, a chimney, and windows that faced the sunrise. I named it Eli's Rest, after my grandfather. Inside, I framed a blown-up version of the original Stillwater deed and hung it above the hearth. Beneath it, I kept the old fishing rod he'd carved me at age 10, the same one I used on my first day back. One evening, not long after the cabin was finished, Mark Carlson stopped by. He brought beer and a folding chair. We sat in silence for a while, watching a breeze curl across the water. You know, he said finally, I think your granddad would have liked this ending. Yeah, I said. He believed in lines that mattered, not fences, principles. Mark nodded slowly. And I guess now they know whose lake it really is. I never wanted to prove anything, I said. I just wanted them to stop acting like they owned what they didn't. The moon rose. The lake shimmered. For the first time since my boots hit the dust, it felt like Stillwater had exhaled too. A week later, word spread that Margie had resigned from the HOA board. The official reason: irreconcilable stress. No replacement was named. Instead, a quieter, more reasonable board formed under a man named Ben Holloway, one of the few who had approached me with decency from the beginning. Ben came by once, asked if we could start fresh. I told him the gate would stay locked, but I wasn't interested in war, just respect. He nodded. That was enough. Now when I sit on the porch at dusk, I don't hear shouts or engines or children I don't know splashing in the water. I hear loons, the rustle of reeds. The clean sound of a place finally returned to itself. Stillwater was mine again, not because I won a battle, but because I never surrendered what mattered, and somewhere out there I like to think Granddad's smiling.